dashboard too. Very good.
All right, it is 1 o'clock. Call this meeting to order. This is the Tuesday, January 10th, regularly scheduled meeting of the Budget Evaluation Team. Looks like all offices are represented. Notice the meeting was properly posted on Friday, January 6th. Item number 1, approval of the minutes. Do we have a motion for the minutes of December 6th, 2022?
So moved.
A motion to approve?
Second.
Yes, okay. And we got a second to approve. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. Item 2, discussion possible action regarding an update on employee benefits. Mr. Wilkerson.
Sure. You might put on. Thank you. Of course, this compares where we're at this fiscal year versus last fiscal year. Net, we're doing okay. We're still ahead gross over last year by about 15%. Net, we're about that percent, but we're having a cash flow issue too and a funding issue. We're running a little behind paying things just because we don't have a cash flow. We're running about $300,000 extra per month than we were last fiscal year. The good news is we're going to deposit a check at this budget board for a prescription rebate because we've had to hold some claims this month. We need a special BOCC meeting to approve those claims after this budget board. That's on a rebate check we received. The next rebate check we should get in March, but we won't get in time to get it on the budget board for March, so it'll have to be in April. So next month, I'll bring an item to get some cash, ask for an infusion of cash into employee benefits. We need to come up with an estimate of what we need to get us to that point for the prescription rebate payment. So that's where we're at right now.
John, so you said that you held some payments. Looks like we're in good shape. I mean, negative 1.1%, so we're ahead of last year. But with some payments being held, that's not exactly the case. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Do you know how much have been held?
Yeah, I have a list here of which ones we're holding. So the ones that are approved on the first BOCC meeting of this month, they're prescription register and 2 medical registers. Those total 1.1 million. Those were approved at the first BOCC meeting, but they're going to be paid on the 17th at that BOCC meeting. On the special one we're going to need to have after the budget board, that's going to pay one prescription claim and another claim check register. We're pushing $261,000 into next month is what we're pushing into next month.
Yeah. And it's fine today, but for me, and whether we attach it here, you just send something additional. If we run into a situation, because we're looking at a comparison year to year to kind of know where we're at, if we are holding claims, it kind of skews the numbers a little bit here. So can you provide a separate document that shows where we actually are with those claims that are being held that we actually pay?
Absolutely. So just be aware that we're going to come next month and ask for some money from reserves so we don't run into the same problem of holding claims. And I'll bring that information too.
So why are we having the cash flow issue this year and we haven't had it in the last couple of years?
Well, I think we ramped up cost a little bit. So we're looking at when I did the first, because we've been through 7 months. So we have 7 months of data. Medical and prescription combined over this 7 months averages about $2.4 million a month. Last fiscal year during the 7 months, it averaged about $2.1 million. So that's about a $300,000 cash issue that we had to come up with extra cash from my understanding. We have 5 months left after this month. I looked at last fiscal year. Last fiscal year, we averaged, in those last 5 months, we averaged $2.4 million a month. So we averaged more the last part of the fiscal year last year. Now, February, we had a huge claim month last fiscal year. I'm not expecting it this fiscal year, so we'll see if that will help. But we're really just averaging about $300,000 more a month over the first 7 months. And we wouldn't, we wouldn't have really had to help too much if we would have got that prescription rebate check sooner, but it's just kind of a timing issue. The good news is our next one comes in March, and it'll be about $1 million. So that should give a good cash infusion into the account.
So is the attribution for that increase, is it prescription or medical or both?
Both.
Which is higher claims.
Just, and what I really attribute it to, and it's across the country, they call it post-COVID utilization. There's a big ramp up in utilization after COVID. Plans across the country are seeing, it's in everything I see. Everybody's experiencing a lot bigger cost. We're pretty lucky at where we're at compared to some groups. I talked to somebody the other day and they were up 60% this year. So, but you know, we're getting along, but we're having to hold claims this month, which is not a good thing. So hopefully we can get some cash into the account to get us over that bubble until the next payment gets here.
Are employees still using the plan as it's designed, or
Oh,
are
yeah.
you seeing people go outside of the plan?
No, they're using the plan the way it's designed. They're just utilizing high utilization.
Okay.
And they're still using our cheaper options, which is good. But it's just a higher utilization year. If we look back 16, 17, I think it was, we had a huge year, way above this year. And it happens every 4 or 5 years, we have a high utilization year. Again, last February, last fiscal year was a high month. And once we bump against those numbers, we'll see. But my notifications of big cases, big surgeries, big claims have decreased. So I don't expect us to have a big February. So that should help our numbers if we have a lower February going into next month.
You expect any more ARPA reimbursements?
Good question. So those are really dwindling down. I submitted October through December for $154,000. So once that gets appropriated, that'll put a little more cash in the fund. But we don't see huge amounts like we did in the past,
Which is a good thing.
which is a good thing.
So you're anticipating next month asking for some from reserve.
Correct.
So I think, I mean, the way this looks, net claims paid, negative 1.1. If that's presented to budget board, if I'm a budget board member, I'm looking at that thinking, wow, we're under what we were the previous year. And then we're going to come back that next month and ask for a supplement from general fund reserve. So that's where I'm coming from on that. The claims that we're holding back, I think we need to include that because that
Those
is
are in here too. Those are all listed in there. Maybe Mike, I don't know if you can provide a better.
so what you've held back that you were telling us about, that's already in these
Yes, sir.
numbers here.
Yeah. So the top part is kind of recording the claims that are due, but they have not necessarily been recorded yet in Munis. So it's really a cash flow issue instead of like that we're really short on the fund, I believe.
Do you keep a record of, and maybe it's something I'm just missing it, but do you keep a record of what was collected through February, say of last year, versus what's collected through
Yeah, I
this year?
can get those numbers.
Just out of curiosity
I
to
don't have them
see.
with me, but
Yeah, we can pull them.
it's more of a
Just see.
cash flow issue too, from my understanding, because the deposits hit on a certain date, and maybe at the first of the month, it may take most of that deposit. So the end of the month, there may not be enough money to pay certain things. But we'll bring in more detailed explanation next month. Kind of show you here. This is where we're at. This is why. This is how much we think a real conservative estimate just to get us through till our next infusion.
So on the first day of the month, we appropriate the 1.5 million like that was collected. So usually budget board appropriates the money from the month prior, right? So for this fund, on the first day of the month, we're appropriating 1.5 million, but sometimes the BOCC meeting is like too close to that day, so they cannot process the claims in time because the money is not appropriated in the fund. The cash is there, it's just not
Yeah,
in units.
but I was thinking that what we used to combat that situation was the rollover amount that, you know, that balance that we were keeping in the account from year to year. But
But there's no you know, the rollover is already included from last year if you're asking about that.
John, you don't think that the pharmaceutical, the first reimbursement that you're expecting this month, plus the 154 ARPA, won't be enough?
Well, it'll
Still
get us.
need-
So the 900,000 prescription rebate will be appropriated at the budget board this month. And then I'm not sure if the 154 COVID will this month or next month.
Because there's a million.
Yeah, that gets
Hopefully
us-
to get us back to
Yeah, if
what's on there.
it
So-
gets processed, it could be deposited on the next budget boards, or, you know, the next BOCC, I mean.
Well,
Yeah.
if the problem is
Sounds like it's time.
the pharmaceutical rebate, that $1 million is gonna get here a little too late to do in February, so it's gonna be March. We could,
It'll
Well, there were
actually
two.
be, it'll actually,
two
yeah, we
coming.
just deposited one last
One
month.
that we just haven't.
And that just has to be allocated. And so the claims we're holding for that one, they're gonna be released, almost everything's gonna be released this month with that special meeting. So going into next month, we're bringing in 261,000 that we're holding into next month.
what I was gonna get at was if it's a cash flow issue, because when budget board meets versus BOCC, we could always look at a one time when it's something like this, a special budget board meeting to go ahead and allocate in a special BOCC if we need to approve the claims to get caught up and move forward instead of potentially having to dip into reserve.
Yeah, because if you put money into employee benefit,
It doesn't come
it'll
back out.
back out, from my understanding. So maybe we could look at that and look at a timing issue too to change the meeting when it's needed. But that's where, you know, we're running about 300,000 more a month than we did last fiscal year. Hopefully it trickles down now. Some of the utilization I see is trickling down, but when it really, the claims hitting our pay is a different thing, 'cause it takes sometimes a year for claims to be paid.
Okay, well, between now and then, it sounds like you're good for now. Mike, if you could get with John and see if it is just a timing issue, if maybe we could have a special meeting in February or whenever it would need to happen, in lieu of moving money from reserve into there, because we can't pull it back out once it goes in there. If we could do a special meeting to be able to appropriate that money at a different date than the regularly scheduled budget board meeting.
Sounds
That
good.
I
might
think we're a
work.
little behind every time, because we're, like, this month, we're covering paying stuff from the last month, right? So it's, yeah, hopefully,
We'll get together and look at it and come up with a plan.
Okay.
And bring it next
Thank you.
month.
Can budget board, say December budget board, have an agenda item, you know, to approve everything, all the employees' benefits payments for January, you know, contingent on receiving them? Almost like,
in budget board,
yeah, like do it, like contingent, like once you receive it, then you've already got the budget board approval, contingent on getting the money.
yeah, so sometimes what we can do at budget board is already appropriate the money received till that day. So we can, like on next week, we can pull in everything that has been deposited from December. It's just not, there's not a lot over, so.
And Christie, they may not know exactly what that dollar amount's gonna be at the December.
Another
we can-
question too,
I mean,
that,
we can get.
Yeah, we get
can
close.
do not to, yeah.
so that 1.5 that's
From
that-
paychecks.
Can you do that? Could you do two of those at once instead of, or does it have to be monthly?
That was kind of my question.
The
yeah.
allocation, yeah. So, you know, they allocate 1.5 million monthly. Could
Contingent
they,
upon receiving them on the last day of the month.
yeah,
And just do 2 months.
2 months at a time?
Are you talking about the
Don't have
general
that
fund
in a
allocation that
receivable.
comes to you, or are you talking about the
No.
allocation of funds that you have come in?
Yeah, it's
Funds we have
received,
come
it's
in.
from the payroll checks.
Yeah.
We receive it from the last day of the month, it gets deposited on the 1st, and then we appropriate 1.5 against that.
Okay.
So it's against the current month receivables or collections.
So from my understanding, we just got kind of a little behind.
Yeah.
And then we kind of ran out of money, so we had to hold some claims. We were hoping to get that prescription rebate check earlier. If that would have happened, then we wouldn't have we only would have had to held one thing this month.
Okay. Well, if you guys can get together and figure out if there's a workable solution beyond a transfer of cash from reserve, if there's not a workable solution, then we can have that discussion as
Sounds
well at next month's BET meeting. All right, any other questions, comments? If not, is there a motion to receive the report?
Motion to receive the report.
Second.
We got a motion and dueling seconds.
No worries.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. Item 3, discussion possible action regarding any item currently on the BET watch list. Is there anything on there that anybody would like to discuss at this time? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 4. Discussion possible action regarding a request from Oklahoma County Election Board for supplemental funding for an amount not to exceed $240,000. This is for costs associated with the upcoming special county election held on February 14th. Kelly?
So in looking at numbers, I think really this will carry us through, you know, we have a special election in March, the governor called too. So I think this will cover us for February and March. I think that we have tried to work it the best we could in order to save the county some additional funds. So, I believe that's the case, but if y'all guys have any questions,
But then we'll still have April.
we still have April, but it won't be, I don't think it will be this. February will give me a good indication on what April's gonna look like.
Is this on the watch list?
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is
Part
on
of
the
the
watch
board.
list.
Is it 480 on the watch
Yeah,
list?
it's on at 480. When we put it on the watch list, if you recall, we were not aware that the governor was gonna call a third
We weren't
election.
either.
We were hoping that it would be on one of the two, the February or the April, which would have lowered the cost. But, so we put $480,000 on there for a February election and an April election. Now that there is a March as well, there's not a dollar amount associated on here. But Kelly did let us know that she thought the 240 was a little higher than what was gonna be needed. So we were hoping that we could still maybe be within that 480 overall
I think
for
we'll
the
be
three.
fine for February and March with these numbers, so.
Okay.
Make a motion, we recommend 240 out of the 480, for approval for budget board.
Leaving 240 on the watch
240
list.
on the watch list,
Okay.
yes.
Got a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Everybody clear what we're doing? Okay, any discussion, comments? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. All right, item number 5, discussion possible action regarding funding needed to cover the elected officials' salary increase, as well as funding needed to cover the 8.5% COLA for those general fund employees that did not receive the full 8.5% given at the September supplement. So if you recall, the September supplement, BET made a recommendation and budget board approved an 8.5% COLA for county employees. And those employees that were paid for out of general fund, Danny ran some numbers to figure out how much each general fund was going to need to be supplemented to cover that additional 8.5%. There were some employees that were not able to take the 8.5% at that time because they were maxed. Now with the elected official salary increase, those individuals are no longer maxed. So I would think based upon budget board action in January, they would get their 8.5% that budget board already approved for everybody because now they can since the ceiling's been lifted. What I was envisioning with this is that, and I'm open to suggestions, but I think a course that we could take is each office get with the clerk's office. I know Mike has done some preliminary research on the individuals that were not able to get the 8.5%, whether it was 0 or 5% of it or whatever. If each office could get with Micah to determine which employees they have and how much money that is associated with them, and then look at which of those are general fund employees. And if it's a general fund, then we can bring those numbers back in February to have a discussion on moving money from reserve to cover those. If those increases go into effect in January, our general fund budgets are fully funded for the entire year. So all the general fund budgets should be able to absorb that increase for 1 month. So I think we would be fine if we take a deliberate approach, really sit down and look at the numbers and come back in February. That's just my thought. I wanted to put something on here to kind of start a discussion. If there's any other idea,
Mike, does
So
that
let's
work for you
entertain it.
in your office?
Yeah, that's fine. I do think that the increases of the elected officials are not necessarily 8.5%. So some employees will not receive the 8.5%, so it will depend on each elected official's department where their employees will fall.
It'll be just like in September when some people were able to take maybe 5% of the 8.5%, but not all of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's tricky, and the reason why I was suggesting that the departments get with the clerk's office is because it's staggered now, so not every office is exactly the same. So when we get with the clerk's office, there can be a verification of what the max, what that ceiling is for that particular office, and what the salaries are in that office, and whether it's a general fund paid employee or a special revenue.
Yeah, so but not everybody thinks they get 8.5% automatically.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's
not.
just like September, you can't get over the ceiling.
That would help identify those.
Yeah, and each department, has the choice to opt in or out, so that needs to be.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, as you're as you're making a determination, did I just make up a word? As you're determining who you have that needs that additional salary, well, it's not a salary increase, but that COLA increase. I would expect that we would all do an analysis of our general fund budget to determine whether we need additional funding or whether we can handle that additional expense for the rest of the fiscal year without additional funding.
So we're holding off on the elected officials' part and any other employees and do it all at once. I mean, which is fine, because you're right, we've got several months down the road. I just wanted to be clear.
That my
Usually in the past,
suggestion.
if there's been elected official raise, they just automatically do it. But
Yeah,
if we're gonna hold and look at everyone's and determine amount, that's fine too. I just want to be clear on,
I don't think anybody. This is just my personal opinion, and I could be way off base here, but I don't think, as far as what an individual, whether it's an elected official or an employee, what their paycheck looks like at the end of January, I don't think that's part of our discussion here, because the elected official salary increase went into effect, so their check is changing.
Okay.
And the employees that didn't get their 8.5, whether they were a general fund paid or a special revenue paid, but they didn't get it because they were up against that ceiling. Now that ceiling has been increased, so they can either get the full 8.5% that they didn't get before, or maybe it's a partial amount of that 8.5%. To me, I think based upon the other action, this is my interpretation, that's going on their paycheck
I got you.
regardless.
It's just us.
It's
finding
just
it
the
when-
additional funding. What are we going to need to supplement those budgets with? I think we can take a little bit of time to actually determine what that is. If that's a terrible, excuse me, if that's a terrible idea, I'm completely open to
No,
other
it makes
ideas.
sense. You clarified exactly what I was,
Okay.
so that basically their paychecks are taking effect. We just.
Yeah, and that's where I think the clerk's office is they're gonna have the information that we're all gonna need, because I think for January, they're gonna be doing those calculations for those employees for their paychecks anyway.
Gotcha.
So make sure that if departments opt out, that they need to communicate that. I don't
think that matters for you. If they opt out
For
of,
the 8.5%? There have been in the past departments that have opt out on COLA, just saying. So you have to make,
I see
Yes.
what she's saying.
yes.
Elected officials are automatic, their raises, they
Yeah,
they
I-
approve, but
yeah.
that wasn't an automatic to take everyone else up. See what I'm saying? So
It's-
an elected official,
no, I get you, but the only thing that held other employees down from getting their COLA was the ceiling that they were at.
so now
That
that's.
ceiling is gone, so the action was taken in September to give an increase, a COLA increase to all county employees. I think now it would go into effect for those that weren't able to get it before. Does that make sense? And that's what I'm saying, that's just my interpretation. I could be off base, but That's my understanding. The only reason why certain individuals did not get an increase in September is because they were capped and they could not receive that. That cap has been lifted on to every elected official's office. Now it's been lifted to a different level depending upon what office you're in, but it has been lifted across the board. Thus, in my mind, those employees that were capped before, their cap is different, so they should be able to get what was approved for all employees in September.
Yeah, I think all departments this go around took the 8.5%, so you're probably correct on that.
I think
I
the
don't
only,
think they can make a decision not to give the.
I think the only discretion other than that would be, we looked at retroactive back to July for those initially at 8.5, but moving forward, I do not see that.
It would not be
No, it
retroactive
cannot be.
because the,
It's still
the,
I just want to make that clear that.
yeah, it would just be for January 1 or January 3 moving forward.
So, yeah, well, it doesn't matter.
So the first month for the paycheck in January that individuals get will, any increase that a particular employee may have would be for the January 3rd to the January 20th portion of that check. It wouldn't be the December 21st through the January 3rd. And just to be clear, this isn't for employees that have already received their 8.5% COLA. We're not recommending or looking at doing an additional 8.5% COLA. This is just for the individuals that were not able to receive it in September.
I guess my question is relevant. So what about, so on, I guess currently three of the departments got the elected officials raise with more than 8.5%. So for those people, like let's say there was a chief that was capped with their elected at the 122 and change. And so if they bumped up to the full 135, obviously that's more than 8.5%. So in this, are we gonna figure that if the chief moves with them, would the funding only go up to the 8.5%, which would be?
To me, that 8.5% is what the board took. So in your
follow,
situation, I completely follow. So an increase in that individual's salary. So if you had an individual that was capped, that was making the max, and they're, I don't know, it was like 10% or something like that, maybe on some of the elected
10.5.
officials.
Yeah.
So let's say 10%. Well, if an elected official wanted to take their employee up to that full 10.5%,
beyond the 8.5.
the 8.5 is what's automatic. The extra 2% would be a pay raise, not a COLA, and that would have to be funded outside of this. So you'd either have to do that within your own budget, or you can come and, request, just like anybody can, an increase in salaries for your general fund budget from a reserve transfer. But to me, that would be a completely separate transaction. It's a good question, and I appreciate that for clarification.
It probably will affect the upcoming budget year, all these increases, but just.
Any other discussion? Any other ideas?
So we'll be on that next meeting on the, possibly if there's needed allocation, correct?
Yeah, the way I would understand the process to be, and I'm just gonna, pull wild and do a wag here. I'm gonna go to Micah, and Micah's gonna say, you've got one employee or two employees, however many, one as a general fund employee and one is a highway cash employee, and neither one of them were able to take a 8.5% COLA. They're now eligible for 8.5%. So I'm gonna say, okay, well, what's that dollar amount? Okay, the general fund is $4,000. I'm just pulling that out, and highway cash is $4,000. Then I'm going to look at my general fund budget and say, can I absorb this $4,000 in my general fund salaries budget? Or, looking at my M&O and my capital and my travel, can I make it through the rest of this fiscal year with my current budget, adding this $4,000? If I can, when we come back here, I'm gonna say, District 1, we had, some increases because of the COLA, but we don't need a supplement from general fund reserve to cover those. We're fine. Your situation may be different. You may have the exact same 2 people, $4,000, but you need $4,000 or you need $1,000 to get through the rest of the year. And so we would bring those numbers of how much we need to our next BET meeting and look at making a recommendation for those supplemental amounts.
So I will be in communication, I guess, with everybody to see how much each department thinks they will need. Is that correct? So that I can put it together, or?
Yeah, that would probably be helpful to have a spreadsheet ahead of time.
Okay. Because I have for the elected officials, I just don't know what every department needs for the other employees.
So like for our specific case, there's only one person that would qualify outside of the sheriff that would qualify for that. So, and in his case, he wouldn't be eligible for the full 8.5%. So what would happen on the back end of that? So kind of the reverse to my question earlier, or maybe a supplemental to it. So if he's only eligible for say 6 or 6.5% now, what about that other 2% that's looming out there for when he succeeds himself?
Okay,
That's all I'm
so
saying.
what you're saying is let's just say 6.5%.
Yeah, whatever.
So if they could take a 6.5%, I'm assuming you're saying that they would be at the ceiling at 6.5%.
Yeah,
Is that correct?
Yeah, because he gets 5,000 less than what the cap is.
Okay, so you would, in my mind, and I'll say this again, I could be wrong, but in my mind, based upon the previous action, that individual's pay would be adjusted this January for that 6.5%, because they can't go over that. But then that other 2%, they can't receive that because they're at the ceiling.
Okay.
And if that employee is paid for out of general fund, then you would need to look and see, can you absorb that in your general fund, or do you need more money? If they're paid for out of a special revenue account, then you wouldn't bring it to us for additional fund. Does that sound like a workable plan to everybody? Okay. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I don't think you really need any action on that. Is there any citizens that signed up to participate? None? Any board comments, District 2?
No, thank you.
Yeah,
You just-
I know, I'm dying to dig in over there.
District 3?
No comments.
Clerk? Treasurer?
Just happy New Year to everyone.
Court clerk? Assessor?
Safe.
Looking forward to another new year and hopefully valuations are good and
We hope.
yeah, that's what I always hope for.
Sure. Happy New Year, everyone. It's good to see everybody again after several weeks, it seems like, of not seeing everybody. So, all right. With that, is there any new business? Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. There is a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. We are adjourned. Thanks, y'all.
You're great. How are you?
I know. Well, I think I'm off to another meeting now, so I don't